So as you're finding your seat, we're going to pick up where we left off on your handout. Okay, so we've talked already about the fact that there are differences between men and women. We're saying that those are good, they're God-given, they're gifts. That's how we should think about them, but we should think about them as gifts that come with responsibility, okay? And we've said those differences are, or at least should be, obvious from creation, from just looking at men and women, okay, and observing them. In the same way, humans should be able to look at the stars and see the glory of God, okay? So what I want to do in this third part is talk to you about just some of the ways that I think modern life obscures those differences that really are there, okay? And then we'll end, hopefully, with some ways that we can strive to honor the differences that we've been talking about, okay? Okay, so when we think about the ways that modern life obscures differences, again, remember the analogy I gave you of the stars, okay? I said the stars are still there, they're shining just as brightly as ever, but the advent of the arrival of artificial light has made it harder for us to see them, at least here in a big city like this, okay? So the question I want to ask then is, what are the equivalents of artificial light when it comes to the differences between male and female, okay? And I'm just going to give you two, okay? Well, no, I'm not. Well, it depends on time, actually. Sorry. I'm going to give you some, depending on time, okay? The first one, though, is probably the biggest one. And that is, like artificial light, it's technology. Now, I mean technology in the broadest sense, okay? And I want to give you two in particular that I think are the most significant. The first is what we could call industrialization, and the second is the pill, okay? The first is industrialization, the second is the pill. How does industrialization affect the way we think about differences? Well, in short order, industrialization brings along massive amounts of mechanical tools and resources that help us do what otherwise were very labor-intensive jobs. Okay? Keep in mind, there are still places around the world that are not industrialized, yeah? If we could all get on a plane, we could fly there, and we all go, oh yeah, men and women still look different here in ways they don't for us anymore because so much work is still manual labor. Well, the thing about manual labor is it requires your body. And one of the places where men and women are most different is our bodies, right? So back in the day when surviving meant farming, it was natural for men to be the ones that did literally the heaviest lifting, right? They were usually out in the farm, they were tilling the soil, they were taking care of the animals, and what was mom doing at home? She was home doing things like sewing, making clothes for everybody, maybe she's churning butter, right? And taking care of the kids, right? Makes sense. Okay? But industrialization comes along and changes all that. So, for example, Mary Harrington, in her book Feminism Against Progress, argues that industrialization in practice reduced women's economic agency in particular, driving a wedge between work and home. Have you ever thought about this? Where does this dichotomy between work and home come from? I'm not saying it's not real, but I'm just saying, where did it come from? It's so easy for us to just think it's somehow always been there. But let me ask it this way, okay? If you think about your house, and think about the things that you consume in your house. Now, by consume, I just mean the things that you use, okay? Clothes, food, you got a television that you use, right? Maybe more than one. You've got a car. Go down the list, okay? Think about all the things in your house that you use to do life. How many of those things were made in your house? Like, none. My kids. Okay, like other than that, you're like, they're not tools. No, they are. They gotta work around the house, okay? I'm counting them, okay? But like everything else in your life, you bought from somebody else making it. Now, if you were to go back even like 150 years, that would be completely the opposite. Imagine if you were one of those really rugged, crazy people that first settled this wild city of ours. And you would come here on a covered wagon or whatever, right? Everything in your home, I shouldn't say everything, but almost everything in your house that you consumed, you had to make in it, right? That is a massive shift in the way we think about life. Everything we consume nowadays comes from outside the home and we bring it in. But back in the day, for most of human history, families have made the things they needed to consume, and at best, they made a little extra that they could then barter with and get something additional, right? Well, one of the things that meant is that actually men and women, husbands and wives, were both very much integrated in that work, right? There wasn't work out there and then home here. There was work and home, and that was one and the same thing. So if you were to look at a woman, a mother, 150 years ago and say, do you work? She'd be like, yeah. And then you say, well, do you work in the home or outside the home? She'd be like, what? Of course she works, and of course it's in the home. And then you could say to the man, do you work in the home or not? And he worked in the home too, do you see? So industrialization has had a dramatic shift, and it's created this wedge between work and home. When industrialization came about, men started to leave the home and go work. Then at the end of the day, they would come back home, right? And it created this bifurcation between the two. And what Mary Harrington argues in her book is she says, as a result, women then, once this started to happen, and the men started to leave to go work, and the things that they used to make in the home, they didn't make in the home anymore. So think things like spinning yarn, making cheese, tending animals, sewing, mending clothes, all that all of a sudden started to be outsourced, okay? They had two choices. They could either make what was left of homework more visible and valued by society to try to justify the fact that they stayed home and didn't go work, yeah? Or they could try to follow men into the factories and offices, yeah? So what I want to suggest to you, rightly or wrongly, whatever, like, we are where we are. We can't change where we are, right? And this is probably a good point to stop and say, look, there's no golden era of the relations between the sexes, okay? There has been a war between the sexes since the fall, okay? There's no golden era. There's an old joke that says, no one will ever win the war between the sexes because there's too much fraternizing with the enemy, right? But it's clear there is a kind of war between the sexes, right? So but don't hear me saying that if we could all just go back to Little House on the Prairie, all our modern ills would be gone. I'm not necessarily saying that, but I'm just saying one of the things we have to do as Christians as we look out on society now is realize what has changed. How did we get here? And only when we do that well can we then start to say, okay, then how do we need to live as faithful Christians in the time and place God has put us? One of the things I kind of get tired of sometimes is Christians today looking at our world and going, they look at it and they're like, I don't know what has happened to the world. It seems crazy from when I grew up, and it probably does. I'm about 40 years old. If you're older than me, you think the world is nuts right now. You cannot figure out how we got here. If you're younger than me, it's all you've ever known, and so you're like, well, what else would it be? Right? Okay? But I want to suggest to you that God has put us in this time and place for a reason. We don't do ourselves any good if we sit here and complain about it. Well, if only I had lived in, 1950? 1850? When do you want to live? 1990, I think, was sort of the golden era. That's when I was coming of age, right? So, but listen to what Dorothy Sayers says, just to get you thinking about this. She says, it's all well and good to say that a woman's place is in the home, but modern civilization has taken all these pleasant and profitable activities out of the home, where women used to look after them, and handed them over to big industry to be directed and organized by men at the head of large factories, right? I'm not saying I agree with everything there, but it's we do need to seriously consider that. The way home has changed for women and for men too, okay? Through industrialization. All right, so just something to think about. We can talk more about that in the Q&A if you want. We can't go back, right? But today, the way I sometimes say it to people is look, if you're running a farm, the physical differences between men and women are so obvious that the division of labor is going to be obvious, right? There's going to be no question well, who's going to build the fence? Well, I am, because I have bigger shoulders, right? Done. I'm going to go do it. But if you spend all day sending email behind a desk, how much do the physical differences between men and women matter? Not at all, right? So the nature of work has changed so much that those differences between men and women are not as relevant in many ways to the kind of work that we tend to do today. And this is, we're sort of, in some ways, post-industrialization now as well. All right, big topic, I know, but just get you thinking about it, okay? All right, then the second one is the pill, okay? The pill. Approved by the FDA in 1960, what changed with the coming of the pill was that for the first time in human history, humans had very reliable contraception. Very reliable contraception. Humans have always tried to figure out contraceptive methods that I can show them to you in the ancient world. I won't. They're weird, but they tried, okay? But the pill dramatically changes everything, okay? And what the pill does, I think, is that it teaches us to think of women as naturally infertile, when in fact, women are the opposite. They are naturally fertile. Men are as well, by the way, but it affects us quite differently, doesn't it? Okay? And what's so significant about that is if you think about procreation, you think about, being pregnant, that's like the point at which men and women are the most obviously different they can be. Would you agree with me? Like, I don't think I need to stand up here and argue tonight that, like, pregnancy is a kind of a big deal, and it tends to affect women differently than men, okay? So, like, all the dads remember, if you're a dad and you've got kids, you all remember, like, your first. You were so excited, but then it was like 9 months of what do I do? I kind of was like, I've still to this day, I'm a little bit upset at my wife because she never got cravings. So we've had 6 kids. She never got cravings. She's a champ when it comes to childbirth. But anyways, that's another topic. But she never got cravings. And I was like, come on, I just want like one. I just want once for you to wake me up at midnight and be like, oh, I need pickles and whatever, something weird, so that I as a man can feel like I'm needed. Do you know what I'm talking about, men? Do you remember this? Because really it was like, I can give her a pillow. What can I do? Rub the feet? You are very limited as a man during pregnancy. And then I hate to tell you, if you haven't had kids yet, it's worse after birth in some ways. Because then you're even less needed in some ways. I was like, now what do I do? I hold the baby and it cries more when I hold it. I'm pretty sure I'm the father, but like, what? I'm like, what am I here for? What am I here for? And then, finally by age 2, they're like, Dad, and then you're like, yes, I was made for this. Okay, really just funny thing, this is like a funny way to think about the differences between men and women is like, you know how dads always do that thing where they hold the baby in their hands, in one hand, at like a certain age. It's usually like around 1. And the baby stands up and they do this. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know what I'm talking about? If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it. You can find plenty of YouTube videos on this. I'm sure it's on TikTok if you're into that sort of thing, okay? But listen, I found a picture of this, and I put it on Facebook earlier today as I was thinking about this, and I just said, has anyone ever seen a mother do this with her baby? Now, this is that risk-taking I'm talking about, right? Because look, if you think about it, one of the things that a good dad does is he's constantly pushing his kids outward and saying, get out there and do it. He's encouraging them to do what he does, which is take risks. And the mother's like, don't do that. Right? Okay, so here's just what my wife said, okay, on the comment. I haven't had a chance to talk to her about this yet. She said, I think having just spent the previous 9 months growing and sustaining that person at the cost of all comfort and sanity might make mothers just a little more cautious about endangering their life with a circus trick. And I thought, yeah, I think that pretty well explains it, right? That pretty well explains it, okay? But I think you would agree with me, men and women are different when it comes to childbirth, right? And taking care of the children, especially when they're babies, right? But the pill comes along and says, you know what? Women can have sex the same way men can. And what is that way? They can have it and not get pregnant. Because the one thing about men is they never get pregnant, right? And so the pill comes along, and feminists, among others, say, this is great. Now, men and women will finally be equal. And you know what? There's a sense in which they're right. Because the point of greatest inequality and difference between men and women is in pregnancy. And all the mothers are like, amen. Right? Because you put up with a lot, ladies, when you carried your children and birthed them, right? But again, the pill teaches us to think of women, girls, as they grow, as they hit puberty and up, to think of them as naturally infertile. But they are not, right? So let me just give you a couple ways that the pill has dramatically shifted our way of thinking about the sexes, men and women, okay? It used to be that if you were a man, a boy, let's call him, okay, a young man, and you got a girl pregnant, you were expected by society to marry her. You had responsibility, right? And it was a shame to you, or at least it should have been a shame to you if you didn't, okay? But today, if that happens, any guy, he's not a Christian, okay? We're assuming a non-Christian here, okay? But a non-Christian guy can look at a girl and say, you should have been on the pill. It's not my fault. And he can walk away because he thinks of a woman like he thinks of himself as naturally infertile, the kind of person who does not get pregnant after sex. Does that make sense? It's totally changed the way we think about men and women and how they relate. One of the things that's interesting is you should think, and there are people who will tell you that as contraceptive use goes up and the use of the pill goes up, abortion should go down. But did you know it's the opposite? Do you know that when the pill came along, abortion went way up? Do you know why that is? Because the pill does a funny thing to people. It teaches girls to think that they are naturally infertile. And the problem is, it's not a problem actually, but they're not. And so all it takes is one time to forget having taken the pill, yes, and then they're pregnant unexpectedly. So actually, unintended pregnancies go up with the pill because the pill changes the way we think about women in particular, right? It also then allows or encourages men not to take responsibility for their sexual actions. I don't know if you saw this week. I'm not expecting you to. If you didn't, it's fine. But Britney Spears has a memoir coming out, apparently, okay? And it hit the news. The big news about it was that when she was dating Justin Timberlake, she got pregnant. And he pressured her to have an abortion, and she did, and she regrets it, right? That's the advent of the pill, because a man says, I don't have to deal with that. I shouldn't have to deal with that. And it's one of the reasons why the pill has always gone hand in hand with abortion. Because those who want the pill have almost always wanted abortion with it as a backstop for when the pill doesn't work, right? And the pill is one of the things that dramatically changes feminism, too. In the second wave of feminism in the 1960s, this is the point at which feminists start to say, yes, men and women shouldn't just be equal in some sort of political sense or in voting rights or something like that. They should be the same. And if I give you one tip tonight, it's this. As you think about sort of our culture and the way our culture distorts the truth about the difference between men and women, it is this. Start watching for the ways that society conflates equality with sameness. Equality and sameness. And once you start looking for it, I'll bet you good money, you'll start to see it everywhere. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, we're not going to get political tonight, although we already are, so why not? Let's keep going. When Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court, okay, Janet Yellen, who is what is she? What is it? Chairman of the Federal Reserve? Thank you. Okay, you can tell I don't teach politics. Okay, she made an argument before Congress. She said the problem with this is going to erase women's equality because women will not be able to work the same way that men does. Because you know what can happen? Girl goes to school. She's in school. She's in college. She meets a guy. She falls in love. If she gets pregnant, it's hard to keep going to school, and it's a major impediment to her career. And Janet Yellen was saying, look, the only way for men and women to be equal economically is to have abortion. And friends, I don't necessarily think she's wrong about that. I think she's right. And I want to suggest to you, that's the kind of equality we should not be seeking as Christians. That's not equality. That's sameness. And God made us different as men and women. Being able to have a baby, ladies, is probably the most incredible thing. As a man, I'll never experience it. Now, part of me is like, okay. Right? Which I think is partly why sometimes, can I just pick on the ladies for just a second, okay? Sometimes I think this is why you don't fully appreciate it. Because there are young girls who think, well, God, I don't see the guys want to be doing this, so it must not be very good. Young ladies, let me tell you, just from watching my wife do it now 6 times, again, it's not something I want to do, but it is clearly one of the most incredible of life's experiences. I watch the way she connects with other moms, and inevitably this happens. She can meet a brand new mom. She's never met her before. The woman's got like a newborn baby, and within 5 minutes they are sharing, you know what these are called? Birth stories. Birth stories, right? She loves to talk about birth stories. I don't have one. Right? But it is incredible. It's incredible The role that God has given you, ladies, in bringing new life into this world is one you should not take for granted. Will it impede some of your dreams and your life choices? Yep, because babies take a lot of work. But this is what I mean by gift and responsibility. And the blessing of the gift comes in the responsibility, right? I could say something similar to men as well on the other side in terms of protection and provision and all that, but you start to get the picture. All right, lots more we could say about that, about the pill and abortion and the way it does, but I just want to at least plant the seed in your mind to start to think, what are the ways that the pill has changed dramatically the way we think about women, okay? Yeah, lots more I could say about that, but that's the problem. I could say a lot about it, so I should move on. Okay. Secondly, this relates very closely to the sexual revolution that happened in the 60s and has been going on since then, okay? The other big thing that the pill did, not only did it teach us to think about women as sort of naturally infertile, which is not true, okay? But it also created a shift in that it disconnected in people's brains, not in reality, okay? But in people's brains, disconnected sex and procreation. So we now tend to think of those as two separate things. That sex is one thing, and it has whatever reasons for its existence we want to attach to it, so they can be arbitrary or whatever, and then there's procreation, and we do that only when we want to. Whereas before the advent of the pill, those two always and necessarily went together, right? Sex always had the potential to lead to pregnancy, okay? Which is why, back in the day, now I wasn't alive back then, so keep in mind, I've heard about this, okay? Back in the day, one of the easiest ways for a girl to push off a guy who wanted her to have sex with him was she could say, I don't want to get pregnant yet. Yeah? That excuse is totally gone. Like if we went over to ASU's campus, that excuse is totally gone for most girls on that college campus. Because any guy can just look at her and assume she's on the pill. He assumes she's naturally infertile, and that's not a reason for her to say no. So it actually encourages men to push more for it. And it takes away one of the strongest reasons girls had historically to not give in, right? If you want a great book on this, I'm going to put a plug in here for it. This book by Louise Perry, she's a British feminist. She's not a Christian, although listening to her podcasts over the last year, I feel like she's getting close. We should pray for her. But she's written the case against the sexual revolution. She's not arguing at all here from Christian principles, but just listen to the chapter titles of this book, okay? Chapter 1, sex must be taken seriously. Chapter 2, men and women are different. I'm like, hello? When do I ever hear a non-Christian make a big point of that? Chapter 4 is loveless sex is not empowering. 5, consent is not enough. The last chapter is marriage is good. Her conclusion is listen to your mother. Let me highly recommend this, especially if you've got like high school or college age girls. I'd highly recommend that. Okay, again, she's not a Christian, so there's points at which I'm going to disagree, but she makes a very compelling case for basically the Christian view of sex and marriage, right? Okay. Now, last thing so the sexual revolution shift and it disconnects sex from procreation. One of the knock-on effects of that is it changes the way we think about marriage. Now, some of you are like, my goodness, what is he not going to talk about tonight? Okay, but just for a second, go with me, okay? Marriage used to be primarily about bringing a man and a woman together so that they could have children, and then marriage was the way that those children were provided for and protected, okay? But once you disconnect sex and procreation from each other, you're now left to ask, well, what is marriage for? And basically the only remaining answer for what marriage is for is the happiness of the adults, and the children become incidental to marriage. So that today, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people, their gut instinct is that they probably think various things about marriage, but it's primarily about the happiness of the adults rather than the protection of children. If there are children involved, they're a good thing, but they're an additional thing. They're not the main thing. And so the result of that then is this leads to things like no-fault divorce, same-sex marriage. I don't think you get same-sex marriage without the pill. It'd take longer for me to argue for that. Things like surrogacy, we could go on and on, okay? If you want a great book on this, I didn't bring it with me, but there's a book called Them Before Us. It is written by a Christian. But it's about all the ways that we in modern society have put the happiness of adults ahead of the happiness of children. And I'd recommend it to you, okay? But that's one more place, okay? Feminism, too much. There's too much to say, okay? Too much to say on this. But feminism, especially since the 60s, is largely, I think, dependent on the advent of the pill and some of those technological changes that we've already been talking about, okay? Let me just say this. There are important forms of feminism that I think are basically self-contradictory because they depend on this idea that what we're after is equality between the sexes, and the way they define equality is sameness. And the way to see the problem is just to ask this: what do you want women to be the same as? And guess what the answer usually is? Men. And so ironically, in claiming to be a movement that's for the benefit of women, it does so by constantly telling women to measure themselves against men. Yeah? And as we already said, one of the things that men do, they don't get pregnant. Right? And so women think, well, okay, then that's the goal. If men are going to be sort of like getting ahead always in rising up the corporate ladder, then that should be my goal as well. And what you do if you make men your model, ladies, is you leave out that huge aspect of what it means to be a woman that is the most distinctive thing you do, which is create new life, right? Now, I know there are issues of infertility and all that, but even if you think about infertility, right? Nobody's ever looked at me as a man and said, because you can't carry a baby, you're infertile. Have they? Because men and women are different, right? Men and women are different. All right, so I think one of the big problems with feminism is that it denies the difference between men and women in order to achieve so-called equality, okay? And in doing so, it makes man, usually defined as like somebody who's really independent, and it makes that the measure of woman. I think that's a big, big mistake, okay? Jay Budziszewski is a philosopher, and he says, paradoxically, the notion that men and women are identical works against the very equality that it tries to uphold. The same are they? The same as what? And those who say they're the same almost always answer the same as men. By the way, there are some feminists who recognize this, and they have tried a different approach. They said, no, we don't want equality. We don't want men and women to be the same. We want women to be better. And they are better. And I think, well, at least that's closer to the truth in some ways. All right. But that's some of the problems with feminism, okay? Another big problem is that for probably the last, going on 60 years now, feminism has generally refused to define what makes men and women different. There's a very good case to be made, and I won't make it here tonight, but I'll recommend this. I'm just going to keep recommending books now at this point in the talk, okay? Called The Genesis of Gender, where she argues that you don't get to transgenderism without feminism and the pill. It's quite an interesting argument. I think she's right, actually. But feminism, because of that idea of sameness and interchangeability, that's how you get to transgenderism. How do you get to the point where men want to compete in women's sports? I don't know if you probably didn't hear this in the news, but there's a technology conference just for women to help them get jobs in the technology field. It's the biggest one in the industry for women specifically. And this year, they had a flood of men show up who had marked on the registration that they either identified as women or were asexual or one of these other new categories, right? And the women were all upset that they were there, and it was like, well, this is the problem. If you can't say what a woman is, then you can't be surprised when the men show up and say they are one, right? So in order to even have something like women's rights, you have to know what a woman is, okay? So one of the ironies of the transgender movement is that its strongest opponents are sometimes feminists, okay? All right, we won't go on there. We'll leave it there. We can say more about feminism. Okay, let's jump to point number 4, because I want to try to stop as close to on time as we can, and then we'll open the floodgates for questions. I'm sure you've got a lot. Okay. So as we think about this, what should we do? Like, at this point in the talk, I might just feel like, wow, you've laid a lot on us, and this just feels overwhelming and kind of depressing even, maybe, okay? And again, I wanted to remind you, no, the Lord has called us to live faithfully at this time and place. So let's not quit before we've even tried, okay, just because we've started to recognize that the problem might be more difficult and complex than we thought, okay? God has given us the tools we need to honor him here and now. So here's just a couple things that came to my mind as I sort of put this together and thought about us in our Christian life, okay? The first is, the broad category is realize that we thrive best when we honor the differences between men and women. Okay? We want to try to honor them. Doesn't mean they mean everything. We are humans. We both share that in common as men and women. But let's try to honor the differences where we can. So first, honor the Bible's view of sexual union. that it is designed to bring the two halves of humanity together in procreative union, okay? As we've already hinted at, when God makes Eve, he takes her out of man and then brings her back to him, and they reunite in marriage, right? And that's a really beautiful picture, okay? Sexual union is also then designed to occur within the safe and protective confines of the marriage covenant, right? You know, one of the reasons, this very simple reason, why does God want sex within marriage? Because he wants the children to have a mom and a dad who take care of them, right? There are various reasons why that might not happen. One of them might pass away, these sorts of things, right, of course. But that's the plan, that's the ideal, that's the design, and it's really, really good, right? You needed a mom and a dad. You may not have had both, but God did design you to have both. And that's why we recognize it as a tragedy when a child is missing one or both of their parents, right? Keep in mind as well that the Bible's view of sexual ethics and what's right and proper is not just an end in itself. We've already hinted at it, but it's designed to point us to the more profound union of heaven and earth in salvation, of the relationship between Christ and his church. It's not like Christians just one day sat around and were like, how could we come up with some things that like in 2,000 years will be like super unpopular? I know, let's say only sex within marriage, right? Like, no, guys. Like all the Bible's prescriptions about sex are designed for protection. To protect women who would otherwise be vulnerable from men who would prey on them. To protect children who would otherwise be left alone and have no one to take care of them, right? Again, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but babies tend to be pretty vulnerable when they're first born. Would you agree with that? They kind of need somebody to take care of them, right? And that's what the Bible's sexual ethics are designed to do, to protect and provide for these kids that come from that union. All right, secondly, honor fatherhood and motherhood as distinct and complementary, right? Again, plenty of overlap. We could talk about that, but let's think about the distinctives. Fathers, you should lead, provide for, and protect well. Lead, provide, and protect well, with humility and with appropriate courage. You hopefully will never have a chance to be on the Titanic, okay? But don't you want to be the kind of man that's ready if that moment comes? I do, and your family does, and they need you to be, right? There are not always chances to be the guy that runs into the burning building. I realize we're not all going to be those kinds of heroes, okay? So those of us that can't be, we'll just watch movies about them and get excited, okay? But there are other ways. At the very least, we should be the kind of men who would do that if the chance arose. Keep in mind, men, that you will, dads in particular, you will set the tone for your family, for good or bad. The Bible teaches that the husband is the head of the wife. It doesn't say be the head of the wife. It says you are the head of the wife. You are setting the tone for your family, whether you know it or not. All right? That comes with blessing and responsibility. Sometimes it's going to feel like a burden, but praise God for that unique job, a job that only you can do. Don't resent it. Don't shirk the responsibility. Lean into it. All right? Again, one way to think about and then you think about being a dad. Dads naturally expose their children to the world and sort of push them to take risks and be independent and go and venture outside the home, right? My daughter's got a cross-country meet in the morning, and, talking about, it's so fun to see the shift because I really was not joking, but, the first year, she's my oldest, and the first year of her life, I felt so completely unnecessary to her. There was, I just did not know what I could do, and it frustrated me so much. I remember my wife telling me, I think she really does like you. She's just a baby. I was like, really? I don't think she does. I don't think she cares about me. But now I'm like, yes, she wants Dad to come to her cross-country meet. Because Dad's going to be the one that yells at her come on, June, you could do it, right? I'm going to be the one pushing her to go harder and further than she thinks she can. Mom's going to be there when she hurts her leg, right? She's going to want to go to Mom at that point, but we know how that works. All right, so dads, do that, though. That's a good thing to do to your kids. Push them. Okay? Get them to take challenges and do more than they think they can do. That's really good for them. Mothers, nurture and care without resentment. Do not make men the measure of your worth, even though your culture is doing a lot to make you think that way. Independence is not a Christian virtue. Praise God for your incredible job as a mother, a job that only you can do. I read an article not too long ago by a lady who's, I think, a really high-powered lawyer. and she had a child later in life. And she wrote in this article about like how much having a child awoke her made her aware of like how incredible motherhood is and what a special job it is. And she said this. She said that her long career didn't hold a candle to being a mother, and that, quote, being a mother is one of the greatest joys in life. This remains true even when, or perhaps especially, because it is not the easiest job. She said, and then she says this, and this kind of blew me away. She said, there is no other job I've had where someone else couldn't ably compete for it, except that of being my daughter's mother. That's amazing. Now, it is also true of dads as well, but that's true. There's no other job that anybody compete for. You're the only mom or dad your kids have. That's an incredible gift. C.S. Lewis once said, and I want to stress this because our culture has a tendency to love moms on Mother's Day, but to love moms especially if they're doing everything else the men are doing as well, right? So you'll see, the news will always celebrate the first woman everything, okay? If it's like a high-powered, high-status job. The first woman fighter pilot, the first one, once we get a female president, the media's going to go absolutely nuts about it, right? But nobody's celebrating the first mother, are they? Well, and part of it's because, there's a lot of them, right, since the first one, okay? To be fair, let's be fair. But that doesn't mean the job is any less important, does it? C.S. Lewis said, I think I can understand that feeling about a housewife's work being like that of Sisyphus. He's the guy the gods cursed him. You remember? He had to roll the big stone up the mountain, and then as soon as he got close, it would roll back over him. He'd have to do it again. He said, basically laundry, okay, moms? And Lewis says, I can understand that feeling that housewife is like that, but he says, surely in reality, it's the most important work in the world. Elsewhere, he said, the homemaker has the ultimate career. All other careers exist for one purpose only, and that is to support the ultimate career. When I was in my PhD, I would go work in the library and write my dissertation, and then I would come home. We had 2 kids at the time, and usually it had been a long day for my wife, and I'd walk in and I'd say, how'd it go? And she would tell me about how it was. And I would sometimes say to her, look, all I did today was think about complicated things and write words that very few people will ever read. You spent the whole day raising human beings. I don't know about you, but I think her job was way more important than mine. Now, it's not really helpful to try to compare them like that, okay? We both had our responsibilities to do. But when I just think about it, I think, my goodness, how much more important was hers? Very few people, as it turns out, have read my dissertation, so that part of it certainly came true, right? Okay. But what an incredible gift. I always think it's amazing when I read, I think it's 1 Timothy, where Paul talks about who are the people that taught Timothy the scriptures. Do you remember? His mother and his grandmother. What an incredible privilege you have, mothers, of getting to introduce your kids to so much biblical truth. That's a huge gift and responsibility. All right, last, we won't unpack this because we need to wrap this up. Honor singleness for its unique blessings. We haven't said anything about singleness, and some of you in the room are going, what about me? I'm not married. I don't have kids. God can use you too, and I think it's fair to say there's real loss in not having kids and not having a family, that you can experience that as a loss. It's okay to mourn that, but trust God that he will provide other blessings for you that will be also unique and particular to you, that will honor him. What a gift it is to be single, to devote yourself more to Christ and his mission, and to be a reminder to those of us that are married that our marriages are temporary, because our marriages are meant to point to the ultimate marriage of Christ and the church. All right. Last 2, just real quickly. Honor the Bible's teaching on male responsibility in the church and the home. You can ask me about that in the Q&A. We're out of time, but that's what you heard on Sunday in your sermon. I take it, so you can ask me about that if you want. And then lastly, discern carefully what society celebrates. I read an article not too long ago that he said, someday I would just love to see on the alumni magazine for a college, you know what I'm talking about? Every big university has their alumni magazine. I want to see a stay-at-home mom on the cover. Yeah? Be careful, or at least ask yourself, be discerning and ask yourself, what does society celebrate? And does it celebrate the same things that God celebrates in his design for the differences between man and woman, right? Where it celebrates the same things that we can, great, we go along with it. But where it doesn't, we say, no. We see the world differently, right? Okay. All right, that's my notes, guys. That's the end of it. I want to stop there, and we'll open it up for questions. Okay? No, that's a lot. How do you want to do this, Chuck? Okay. So I guess just, if you've got a question, raise your hand. We don't need to complicate it any more than this. Don't all be shy. Yes, okay, yes.
All right, so going back to your definition of what it means to be a man and a woman.
Yeah.
Say who is ready to be a father, who is ready
Yeah.
to be a mother. So
Yeah.
didn't really elaborate much on like singleness and all that, but
Yep.
would you say that men and women ought to, thank you, would you say that to be a man means that one ought to be pursuing marriage and fatherhood?
I think you have to discern the Lord's call. So I think there is such a thing as a call to singleness. If you think about somebody like John Stott, or I had a preaching professor in seminary who was this way, the Lord may call you to that, and you have to discern that. That's a process you want to do with other people in your church. But here's what I can say. Statistically speaking, the chances are very good that the Lord is not calling you to that. Because if we look at the statistics, most of us end up getting married eventually, right? So at the very least, I think it's a good thing to be thinking, am I becoming the kind of man or woman that would be a good spouse, would be a good father, would be a good mother? And then if you don't, if the Lord keeps you single, those are going to be things that you're going to find other outlets for and other ways to use. Does that make sense? But they're still going to make you a good man or a good woman. Does that make sense? Okay, I could say more probably, but I won't. Hanu?
You said marriage protects the children of the woman. Are the men protected, or did you take that out? Did you not mention that because men are protected?
I think the men are especially the protectors. So I think it's good for them, to be sure, yeah. But they tend to be, certainly throughout history this is true. It's less so today because of the economic and educational independence most women have. But certainly in the past, they didn't need it the way women and children did. This may surprise you. I didn't talk about this. This may surprise you, but as long as I have been alive, women have outnumbered men in college. And so much so today that colleges are actually now doing special. They're not very vocal about it. You can probably figure out why, but they're trying to do special things to attract more men. Because there's it's like a 60-40 split. One of the reasons that will become a problem is because women tend to want to marry more educated men and men who have greater earning potential than they do. It's just what attracts women to men. So if you end up with a society where 60% of your women have college degrees and only 40% of your men do, that's going to become a problem, I think. So I don't know where that came from, but yes.
Yeah, so you very briefly touched on sort of the crisis of young men not really having an understanding of what it looks like to be a man or masculinity in general.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, especially I don't know all the statistics offhand, but I think I recently saw that the majority of children in America are now born out of wedlock.
Yep, it's true.
So there's this general issue of young men growing up without fathers in many cases. So do you just have general advice on us as Christian men of what can we do in society at large to sort of fill that gap for fatherless young men?
Is this being recorded, Chuck?
Yeah.
Okay, should I need it? Okay, so I'll just have to think carefully about what I say. So if you're like, you should have done that 2 hours ago. I know, but can I put it just in terms of the church? Because society is so big, and maybe I'd take it too far afield, and I'm certainly not an expert on that. But I think it's a real chance for us as a church to step up. It's hard to come to a church if you're a single parent. It is. And I bet if you looked around a church on Mill, I bet most of your families are intact, aren't they? So it's something we could think about as churches, what can we be doing better to support single parents? Here's the thing about single parenting. Most of them know this is not ideal. Very few single moms are what would be great is to be a single mom. Most of them are not. So let me just speak to my own personal experience. My parents got divorced when I was 10, so I grew up with a single mom. And my church was instrumental, I think, in my development. We had a program called Boys Brigade. I don't know if you guys know, do that, do you? It was like a Awana kind of, or actually like Christian Boy Scouts, basically. And there were a couple men, so my mom would take me to that every Wednesday, and there were a couple men who just kind of took me under their wing. And I have vivid memories of one of these guys. He took me with his son was my age, so I got along with him, and he took me on the camp out with them. And I still have like really vivid memories of that camp out, hanging out with his son and just getting to enjoy his dad kind of taking me under his wing. And to this day, I would say one of the reasons in God's providence and his kindness that I turned out as well as I did is that I was at a church that had a lot of godly older men. They probably didn't know it, but I was always watching them. And so a couple things I could say is, as a church, be thinking about that. How can we minister to families of single parents? And then boys in particular, if you are an older man, and you see any boys in this church where they don't have a dad around, ask yourself, what can I do? You can't fill the gap, I want to be clear. Like, only a dad can be a dad, but there are still stuff you can do to help show them what does a good godly man look like, and you never know what impact you might have. So it's a great question. No more questions, really?
You mentioned that independence is not a Christian virtue, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I wonder if the inverse is true. Is independence a detriment, and can it be?
Is independence a detriment? Yeah, it can be, except I'll caveat this. This is what the caveat I should have given. Except for my kids, my goal is to make them independent. I want to get them out of the house. You know what I'm saying? So it's a relative thing, though, right? Like, it is a relative thing. Okay, we all want to get the kids out and independent, right? But I think what I meant in particular is like independence of male from female. Like we are very dependent on each other. One of the things that Paul makes in 1 Corinthians 11, there's some confusing elements in that passage to be sure, but he's really clear that men and women are dependent on each other. He makes a point to say to the men that even though you're the heads, he says, you all came from a woman, right? So we're all interdependent. I don't know, do you want me to say more about that? Okay, good. That's a good question.
We went over 1 Timothy 2.
Did you already ask one?
Yeah.
Students only get one question, Hanuel. All right, go ahead.
I'm not a student anymore.
Oh, okay. Okay. Former. Go ahead.
But you're a teacher. We went through 1 Timothy 2 this last Sunday, and one of the puzzling verses in it was 1 Timothy 2, verse 15.
Yeah.
Where it talks about the woman, she will be saved through childbearing.
Yes.
If they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control.
Yes.
We're talking about God and gender, and you're also a New Testament professor. Could you weigh in on the preposition
what in the
through?
world that means.
Yeah.
Okay, I have no idea what Chuck said on Sunday, so Chuck, sorry. Okay, whatever I say. I don't know if this is going to be what you said or not. I think there's a interpretive issue there in the preposition through. So the text says that she will be saved through childbearing. If you were to turn to 1 Peter, you'll find a similar use of the preposition where Peter says that Noah and all those on the ark were saved through the waters of the flood. Now, if you think about that, what does it mean that they were saved through the waters of the flood? It does not mean that the water saved them. It means they were saved despite the waters of the flood. Are you with me? If you read 1 Timothy 2:15, in light of the curses back in Genesis 3, which we didn't get to, but one of the things that's striking about the curses in Genesis 3, remember Adam and Eve both sort of blame different people? that's so amazing. It's like watching my kids fight, He did it. He started it, right? Okay. The woman you gave me, it's like, not now, Adam, not now. But anyways, the curses are very specific. So the ground is cursed because of Adam. Why? Because God had given him the special task in Genesis 2 to keep it. Right? And then what's the curse on the woman? Pain in childbearing. So God takes the very sort of distinctive functions that each one has in that command to be fruitful and multiply, okay, and subdue the earth, and they each get cursed in a way that sort of reinforces their distinctiveness as male and female. So when Paul says that she will be saved through childbearing, I think what he's saying is, he's given outlines of things that women can't do. And he's saying, look, don't think that because of these differences between men and women that women can't be saved. In fact, she will be saved despite the fact that the curse took a particular form on her as a woman. So if I were to put it in other terms, if Paul were speaking to men in that part of the text, which he's not, but if he were, I think he might say it something like this, that men will be saved through thorns and thistles. through thorns and thistles. Why? Because thorns and thistles are the particular form the curse takes in Genesis 3. In our distinct roles, our distinct functions as male and female, in doing the task of being fruitful and multiplying and subduing creation and making more image bearers, God says, look, before the fall, each of your functions were going to be wonderful and beautiful. They were going to work together in perfect harmony. And because of the fall, even those wonderful distinctives are now going to be part of the thing that brings you burden. Right? And so the promise in 1 Timothy 2:15, I take it, is a great promise. He's saying that's all going to be undone. Right? What do we sing at Christmas? Far as the curse is found. Right? Far as the curse is found. And so I think, to unpack that just a little bit more, I think it's really wonderful that when you think about redemption, God chooses to incarnate his son through birth. That's not an accident. That the curse was the woman will have pain in childbearing. And it's basically God takes the very shape of the curse and basically turns it in on itself and says, you know what, I'm going to take a birth and bring the Savior of the world to you that way. I think it's beautiful. So that's kind of how I take it. I need to write an article on that, though, and I haven't. So,
Dr. Gurry, could we end with you giving us 2-3 minutes on how does this relate or intersect with the task of evangelism?
The task of evangelism?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. I thought you were going to ask me something totally different. This is where Chuck asked me the one thing I didn't say, right, that he wanted me to. Are you thinking like apologetically or no? Just whatever. I don't know. I don't have anything. What do you want? What do you? I've got a lot of things to say about a whole lot of things, but nothing on that.
What if we encounter somebody in
Yeah.
a non-believer?
Yeah. How do we then engage them? Yeah. Okay, so this is where you have homework. Okay? Because I've given you a whole lot of, I just basically spilled my brain on you tonight is what I did. Okay? You now have to go home and think about it. I would love it if we had time to just sit with each and every one of you and say, okay, in light of what we talked about, how would you describe the blessing of being male and female? And give you a chance to just express your own thoughts and think it through from your own experience, not mine, not the stats I've given you, but just like your own very real experience that's particular to you. What would you say has been the gift and responsibility of being male and female, and how have you seen it as a good thing? Right? Maybe it's been a bad thing at times, but you've seen God redeem it. So that's what I encourage you to do. Is actually just think about it and ask yourself, what would you say to somebody? Because that would be my two big categories, is to say, I'm always thinking in terms of how is it a gift? And in light of some of the technological things we've thought about, is like how is it obscured for people? Because I really don't think that most people are out there thinking, how can I ruin God's good design for the sexes? But there really are things about our society and technology that make it harder for them to see the good things. And then they have been fed certain lies about like equality and sameness and all that. So just thinking through those things like, why is it great to be a woman? Why is it great to be a man? And then going from there. We could talk maybe more. Yes?
So natural law is appropriate.
Yeah, for sure. Great book on this, okay? Where's Gracie? Is she here? Yes. Did you get the further reading, recommended reading that I emailed you? No, she didn't. Okay. I sent Gracie very late, though, like 2 hours before I got here, a list of further reading. You did. Okay, but you didn't get it. Oh, okay. All right, fair enough. But there's a great book by, now I can't think of the title, that's why I brought it. I didn't bring it with me. But yes, Natural Law is very good.
You can send it out, though.
Okay, if you send it out, if you guys can send it out, it's on that list. Yes.
When we were talking about working, I was thinking about Ruth and how she was working on the field. And Boaz even says, like, stay with the young women who are working.
To protect her.
So do the roles of young women versus older women differ, or how do we look at this?
That's a good question. Ooh. Do the roles of older women and younger women differ? Is that your question? Ooh.
In regards to working and...
Yeah, okay. So I would say this, like before you have a family, you're way more free. And you've probably, depending on your circumstances, you probably have to get a job, right? And support yourself. And like, depending on your age, your parents want you to. Again, that idea of sort of like get out of the house, right? But as you start, if you get married and then start to have a family, that's going to change dramatically. And you've got to navigate those questions then as a spouse and a mother, right? And again, what I would just say in general terms, I would have to answer the question more specifically in a particular circumstance, but I would say do not resent the fact that particularly once you have kids, they are going to take you away from work, right? At least work outside the home. You just can't. Like, you can't have, I think, well, I won't get into it, but babies are a lot of work, right? And you're not going to be able to work the same way you did before, and I think that's a good thing. In my experience, most new mothers want to stay home with their kids. But you can't always, and so it just depends on the circumstances. But I think it's good to try. It's good to try. I'm not sure. Do you want me to, what else do you want to know about that? Okay, all right. You can ask me more offline. I'm not sure. You should ask an older woman. That's a great question. Ask Chuck's wife. I did not mean it that way. I did not. Okay.
You did great. You did great. The whole night until the last sentence.
I'm out.
It's because I came on the stage and he saw me. That's why.
I am so
right,
sorry.
my dear? Yep.
I meant wiser.
There we go. Would you join me in thanking Dr. Gurry? You served us extremely well. Thank you, brother.
I know it's a lot, so I'll stick around a little bit afterwards if you want to come ask the question you didn't want to ask in front of everybody. So.
Great. Thank you. So if something else on your mind, he has opened himself to further questions. Thank you for being here tonight. Encouraging to have a room full of people continuing to think through this issue. It is the defining matter of our era. And that places responsibility on us to have thought through it carefully. And you are a people who are open to doing so, continuing to learn and expressing humility. So praise God for that, and just really thankful. Let me pray for us as we close. Lord, we thank you for Dr. Gurry and his wife and his children. Thank you for the way in which they're seeking to model the things he's talking about. We pray for us as this information lands on each of us in different ways. I was just thinking about the circumstances that I'm aware of in people's lives as we were considering these things tonight. And so this isn't a test tube science experiment in a sort of clean room. This is a messy, real world right here. And we thank you that both your scriptures and what's evident in what you've made in creation say the same thing, communicate harmonious truths. Help us to live this out well and to live it winsomely. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.